Hello and welcome to Brain Trust Live number 501.
This week on the podcast, we've got polling, and we're not sure if you've heard, but the presidential election is close.
Plus, the New York Times makes an unforced error in using an extended tennis metaphor during their coverage of Kamala Harris' CNN interview.
And Kamala Harris, our greatest philosopher on the concept of time, shows surprising discipline in a major new interview.
Plus, having made it an issue in the first place, Trump is now getting on all sides of the IVF issue in record time.
And did AI write Lara Trump's new single, or is Lara Trump actually AI?
We'll have all this and more.
This is Brain Trust Live. Hey y'all, I'm Brent.
I'm Lila, and you can find us on the web at www.braintrustlive.com.
Here we are, episode 501.
Episode 501.
Starting our new
lifestyle as 500 episode recorders. In celebration of this, you could follow us on social. Was an idea.
Please do.
We're just at Brain Trust Live or Brain Trust Live Pod everywhere.
Yeah.
We're easy to find. Our logo is always a brain with a check mark.
Yep.
And that's how we think of ourselves. Thoroughly approved brains.
That's right. Oh, boy.
So we're now into really our greatest area of expertise, which is pre-race speculation.
That's right.
Like,
we love to speculate.
We love to get into a polling average and just like chit-chat our lives away about that.
Yeah.
Before we do that, what is happening in France right now?
Oh, right. There's a note on our document right now where Brent is going to tell Lila what's going on in France. But the problem is that
look it up.
Brent can't tell Lila what's going on in France. I can broadly tell you what's going on in France.
I'm curious what
and then
the outline is.
And then we can ask our listeners.
Right, to share what's actually going on in France.
To go look it up themselves. But there's like some straight up shenanigans going on over there.
That's what you said.
Yeah, because apparently like the left who won the last elections, remember they had like some snap election that Macron called.
And we were all celebrating.
Right, and we were all celebrating, and everybody was concerned that Le Pen was going to win, right? And then all of a sudden, it's not. It's the socialists and the communists and the various other left parties who like win all the elections. Well, as the middle is often wont to do everywhere, worldwide, as it turns out, because we're seeing it in France now. Because as you know from having listened to this podcast for 500 episodes, we like to talk about how it seems like the middle is often far more antagonistic to the left than it is to like real life fascists.
That's right.
Right? Sooner team up with Donald Trump than they would with Bernie Sanders.
Correct.
That's what's happening in France right now.
Yeah.
So Macron is like, they're looking for a new prime minister. He's literally meeting with Le Pen, who is France's Trump.
God.
Just because they don't want to seat the left as prime minister, whoever's going to be.
Like,
so
you guys.
It's real crazy over there now. It's like essentially a coup. He's like cooing his own government.
I mean, if I had to pinpoint a place where I thought this might be possible, I mean, my first guess would be Israel. But my second guess would be France. This feels very on brand for them.
Yeah. Well, and I think the left I think they're filing impeachment.
They should.
Papers.
Screw this guy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
There is a level of pragmatism that is actually too pragmatic. Like,
Right.
I feel like when moderates do this, they often are like, we're just the party, we're just pragmatic governance people, and we got to be pragmatic, and all the pragmatism is so important for pragmatism's sake.
Right.
And, like, oftentimes they lose the plot somewhere in that adventure of a sentence.
Yeah.
And this is an example of being more pragmatic than it takes.
Right.
So it's an example of that.
Anyway.
I don't know what else to say about it.
Yeah. Anyway, that's happening.
Yeah, I guess I am not
Maybe that's not exactly happening. Something like
Here's
what
the
I
thing.
just said is happening.
I want to say the responsible version of do your own research, but I don't want to say do your own research because that is what anti-vaxxers say.
Yeah, find an article like in Le Monde or something like that.
Find a real article that can... Here's what we're reporting. Something interesting is going on in France.
Right. I know.
Please let us know if you know more about the details than we do.
I know. I shouldn't have gone into such detail because what do I know?
Well, no, I thought it was a great story.
Yeah, but what we do know is what's going on in this election.
We sure do.
Because we are experts on that.
And we've done the research.
As we said. And we've done the research. That research we've done, and it's in front of us, and we're going to tell you about it right
That's
now.
right.
And I want to add to that, actually, because you said this is what we do, and we're prognosticators. And look, anybody can prognosticate. But I would also say we have a long-standing 500 episodes worth of quality prognosticating.
Yeah.
Including prognosticating that becomes popular amongst the mainstream long after we prognosticate.
Yeah. We're good at this part of the election reporting.
Yeah.
And I feel like not only are we good at it, but we now have like a long store of knowledge about how this has happened in every election since 2012 in detail.
Yeah.
Like we have been doing this since the 2012 elections, the 2012 primaries. And because of that, we know our polling.
Right. Now, that being said, I have no idea who's going to win.
No. And unlike certain prognosticators, I'm not here to try to even tell you.
I know.
Here's what we're here to do. We're here to tell you where there are potential pain points and potential interesting things that are happening.
Yeah, right, exactly.
We're here to tell you what states might be interesting to donate time or money to and what states might not be.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The important stuff.
Yeah.
And we're, also here to wonder to ourselves about how third-party candidacies are going to shape these races, because I think a lot of prognosticators kind of pretend like there are not third-party candidates, or they just are like tisk-tisking about them. Well, and like I'm actually interested in where they're appealing and why.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because, we're going to go over some polls right now, and I used the 538 polling averages. I cross-checked them, at least broadly, with the New York Times polling, and they were sort of at least showing similar trends, so I felt like it was safe. These numbers that we're giving you are from 538. But you have to, on both of those sites, you have to do something specifically to get numbers that include the third parties.
Yeah.
Which is wild because they're on the ballots.
Right.
So and they're being included in polls.
And
so like,
they're
why are you giving me
blamed when people don't win? And it's like, well, maybe you wouldn't have been so shocked if the polls had showed that these candidates had 3%.
But they did, but they're just not looking at them.
Yeah.
I thought that was one thing that I wanted to mention that was so bizarre. Like on the 538, it gives you the polling ad of the head-to-head. And then it lists all of the specific polls that they're using. And you have to click on a drop-down arrow for each of the polls to basically spread, get the full information about with what it's like with Kennedy and Stein. And then the same thing on the New York Times, you click on each individual state and then it gives you the head-to-head, and there's a separate tab that gives you with third parties.
Like, why?
Like, we're living in a world with third parties. Like, you may be mad. Republicans and Democrats may be equally mad about it, but such is life.
That's life in the fast lane of American politics right now. Right. And also, this is a race where a third-party candidate might have a meaningful impact on the outcome now because he's choosing to remain on the ballot in certain states and not others.
Right. Yes. Well,
so,
and also,
what if they misjudge which states he should drop out of? That's information you might want to know.
100%.
But will we know? No. We'll never know. So we're just here to tell you you won't know. We can't report the facts on that count to you, but you will never know.
Yeah.
But yeah, Kennedy dropped out last week. So
he did. That was our breaking news. Remember, we got to report that.
That's right. Live from his long rambling comments that only got to the point at the very end after a few digressions and several news digressions.
We had watched 30 minutes of it ourselves and then had to find out later by reading an article about it that he had endorsed Trump.
Well, especially because the news cut away from it more than once.
Yeah.
And it seemed like he was heading in every direction.
It surely did.
And the outcome is actually this. He endorsed Trump, sort of, but he's staying on the ballot in non-competitive states because he wants to show the people.
But some states won't let him get off the ballot.
But some,
there's some that are going to be competitive where he's still going to be there because they're like, dude, we're out here printing ballots.
Right, it's too
late. In September, they're going to be in the mail in a second.
Yeah, no. So this is going to have, I think, a sort of difficult to anticipate consequence because while I would argue that probably his supporters are a little bit more tuned into his campaign than the other candidates' supporters.
Yes.
Because, why would you even know to vote for him if you weren't paying attention to him?
Yeah.
Which
is weird that you would pay enough attention and then still have decided that you were going to vote for him.
So confounding.
What a real scenario you found yourself in at that point.
Yeah, no, people are falling into rabbit holes of thought right now that I don't know how to necessarily sort of make sense of in my own brain. That said, I don't think it will be easy to figure out how his voters actually end up behaving.
No, I think, and I actually did, I want to say, see some poll last week that showed that it was sort of not really a ton of movement. I think 20% of his voters had gone to Trump or something, and then 20 of them were undecided, and then some people were saying they weren't going to vote. And so, it's I really do think that overall maybe on the margins helpful to Trump, but I don't think it's in any sort of by the time that he dropped out, he was polling at 2-3-4% in some of these places anyway. So it's we're talking on the margins, and I understand, as we are about to tell you, some of these states are tied. So that could be something, but I just don't know that we're gonna wake up when this election is finally called at some point in November or December, who fucking knows, and really think to ourselves that it was the RFK factor that really did the whole thing in. It just
well,
doesn't...
they won't blame him because he's not a leftist.
Well, right, I was going to say.
But
we may wake up and think that Jill Stein did that because...
I was going to say, one thing that I thought was really interesting about the time that Brent and I went to a Jill Stein rally on this podcast.
Yes.
And we went and interviewed people there.
Yeah,
and her. And almost all of the voters there said to us, I either didn't used to vote or I wasn't planning to vote if I couldn't vote for her.
Yeah, they weren't Hillary Clinton supporters that were disaffected
yes.
from the Bernie Sanders campaign that were voting for Jill Stein. That's not what happened.
No. And so I think that there's often this perception that third-party voters will move somewhere if they're not given the chance to vote third party.
Yeah,
and actually a lot of them just don't.
Yeah, right. Right.
Like, I don't know that I condone that behavior, but you have to do you.
That's right. And that's what they're doing.
And that's what they're doing.
When you're voting consistently for third parties,
you're doing you.
Definitely doing you.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's like, what am I supposed to say to that?
Right.
So let's talk about the national polling at the moment. That is misleading, obviously, because no one cares about national polls. Because like with every election of the last 20 years, I think we're all fairly aware of the fact that Kamala Harris will be winning the popular vote. There's not really...
Although those have been getting close also.
Well, I'm sure, but I mean, like...
They're always close, I guess.
They're always
yes.
close.
Yeah.
But also, if this race is polling as close as it is polling now, even in battleground states, there is almost no world... Let me put this a different way. This is not about Kamala Harris. There is no world in which Donald Trump wins the popular vote.
No,
that's not a realistic world.
Yeah.
There is a realistic world where he wins the Electoral College.
Yes.
But there is not a realistic world where he wins the popular vote. There hasn't been a realistic world for Republicans to win the popular vote in like 15 years.
Yeah.
Like literally since we've started doing this podcast.
Yeah.
So we haven't been doing it 15 years, but we've been doing it like 12.
Yeah.
We've been doing it a long time. Anyway, my point is, I feel like looking at national polling is helpful in terms of like vibes, but like we all know that at the end of the day, Democrats will be leading in national polling because their ideas are more popular.
Right. Well,
and that won't matter.
I would say the only reason that looking at a national poll right now is interesting because it has Harris up by about 3% when you take the average, is that my guess is, and I didn't look this up, but this time 7 weeks ago, Biden was probably losing by 3 or 4 points.
Yeah, way underwater.
So like in that respect, it's sort of like interesting to see as just sort of like, you know, how times have changed sort of snapshot. But beyond that, it's really more about the specific battleground states, which we're going to take you through next.
Exactly. So I feel like we're starting with Arizona.
Yes.
And I also think Arizona is the most important, is not the most important, but the most interesting of all of these states right now. To me.
Because there's some weird state, because there's also a Senate race.
There's a Senate race
happening right now.
And in that, so Carrie Lake, there's self-described current sitting governor /
Carrie Lake. Crazy.
Resident. She's a resident crazy person.
Yeah.
She is running for Senate there.
Yeah.
That is Kirsten Sinema's seat.
Yes,
is it not?
It is.
And Ruben Gallego.
She's not running.
She's not running.
Right.
Ruben Gallego, who's the Democrat, is up by like 8 or 9 points on average. He's running away with that race.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting to know that, and then also know that Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are essentially tied in the state.
Literally.
In a literal way, yeah.
Yeah. And in sort of kicking off a bit of a theme that you're going to see as we take you through these 7 or 8 states, there's been some recent tightening. Now, in Arizona, the tightening is actually good for Harris because this was a state that Trump was very much winning. And I know that Democrats have won the state before, but Biden was losing here. And there were rumblings that perhaps some of these Sunbelt states were not worth, when we were in a Biden world, that maybe these were gone. Yeah. Maybe Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia were not worth putzing around with. Let's just focus on the upper Midwest and the Rust Belt, and that gets you to 270, and those are sort of close. So this is actually like good that this is close right now. But it is interesting.
It was interesting before because we knew Gallego was up long before this change in the top of the ticket happened. Yeah. So it has been curious this whole time.
Yeah.
But there's like there are a bunch of Arizonans who are going to split a ticket there.
Yeah, for sure.
And that ticket is going to be split over 2 candidates that are essentially Donald Trump.
Yeah, I know.
It's so confusing.
Yeah, it's wild. Yeah. But I think that Harris a couple of weeks ago, and this is sort of consistent throughout as well, it does seem like the race is sort of like leveling off a little bit, right? Yeah. Like people were like big excited about her getting into the race. Everybody was living their most joyous life, right? And we were all
it was great.
Celebrating and doing what we were doing. And now everyone since the convention, she got maybe a little bit of a bump there, but we've also now remembered that you have to act like a Republican.
Exactly.
Or you think you do. Anyway,
right.
Democrat.
We've remembered that Democratic lore is that you have to act like a Republican.
We're going to talk about that when we get to her interview that she did with CNN this week. So I think it seems like everything within the last 2 weeks has had like some sort of like 1 to 2 to 3 point movement like back toward Trump, and they're minuscule. But like it's notable in the sense that like we seemed like we were living in a world where like it was more of a slam dunk than we're living in right now. And it was never a slam dunk, but like just broadly there's been sort of like going back to things being close, which is why I was joking about not knowing what's going to happen at the beginning, because who could?
And I also think that to some extent they're just getting their ground game operation going for the Harris campaign, whereas I would assume the Trump campaign has been thinking about this for a while if they're planning to have a ground game, which I can't tell you if they are because I don't know what they're up to at this moment. But I think this is usually the part of the race where things are close. Usually this happens earlier in the cycle, but this part of the race is in part close because like a bunch of people still don't really know what they think of Kamala Harris because no one's reached out to them about her, and they're not like, you know. So I think there's probably more room for movement for Democrats with these numbers than there is for Republicans because like we know what we're getting with Donald Trump, and we've said that this whole time. And one of the things we were concerned about with Biden was that there was no room for movement. Because it was like, you either like him or not, he's only getting older and weirder. Right. Like, there's not, like, an opportunity for them to make a new argument for him. We're still in a phase where we're getting, it's like a very new argument for Harris. And so, could she squander that? Sure. She'd give a rambling.
Might she try?
She will try.
Right.
But there's an opportunity, I still think, for these numbers to do some slow movement towards Election Day in her direction.
Yeah.
In part because there's just a lot of voters who are like, who the fuck is Kamala Harris?
I get that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Arizona, we're going in alphabetical order, by the way. Arizona, tied. Moving on to Georgia, tied.
Yes, right. And Georgia's a state...
like, literally tied.
Georgia's a state that loves to have a tied polling scenario like this.
And again, this is another one of the states. There are some states where the tied nature of them are bad for Harris because she's sunk a little bit. But this is another one where, as I mentioned, some of the Sunbelt states had seemed like under Biden was probably a lost cause.
Yes.
And it was interesting that Georgia was the first place that she went after the convention, had a big rally with Walz, and I think it's because she's probably looking at some internals there.
I think she could win Georgia.
Good for her.
Georgia has been electing Democrats in close races at, in very slight margins.
Biden and 2 senators.
They have 2 Democratic senators there. So, like, the fact that we weren't already in the mix there was concerning. But I think it's
But it was the first time that had happened in some time. They've had blowout governor races since then.
Oh,
I mean, so it pretty much everybody statewide is a Republican.
The statewide races are all Republicans, but in presidential years, Democrats do pretty well there, and that's
a
new thing.
Yes,
and I think it's in particular a new thing because they turn out a lot of black voters in Georgia for Democrats. And when people's enthusiasm is low, a lot of those voters don't show out. But I think that there's an opportunity for the Harris campaign to maybe make up some ground with black voters in Georgia who are really like the backbone of the Democratic voting bloc there. Yeah. And like they have a lot of national figures who are going to be, that's where Stacey Abrams is from. They have a lot of people who are going to be like hitting the stump hard there. And so as long as they're investing there.
Right, exactly.
Then, we're doing it.
I have some thoughts that I'll share after we get completely done with this as to where I think that she should be paying attention and going, and she doesn't care what I think, nor will she listen to me. In my own personal opinion, Georgia is not one of those places. No. When I saw that she had gone immediately there after the convention, I thought that was wrong.
They probably just saw an opportunity to do a quick flip there.
Probably, yes.
That'd be my guess.
Yeah. Anyway, Michigan, we're seeing, again, in the polling averages, we're seeing Harris up by 2. But this is a tightening where she was up by anywhere between 3 and 4 in these polling averages a couple weeks ago. So this is sort of a tightening in favor of Trump. There's been some polls that have come out recently there that shows the race tied there, and even a couple that have Trump up by 1 or 2. All within the margin of error. The 2% that she's up, it's 46 to 44 when you take that's the 538 average. That's, obviously going to be within any poll's margin of error. So you could call that tied. I mean, I guess maybe you're seeing a minuscule Harris lead, but like essentially tied.
Maybe you shouldn't insult one of the state's most important Democratic voting blocks.
Well, that is part of it. And we talked about this on the podcast last week as to why I was so mad at the fact that they did not put an Arab American on the convention stage to deliver a speech. I think that the messaging, we were hopeful that maybe Harris was hearing some of the messaging after she, shouted down the protesters and then did it better the next time. But clearly she's been getting notes on her recent messaging that she has not been taking about what's going on in Gaza right now. And the ADC, which is the Arab American Anti-Defamation Committee, which is the country's largest Arab American organization, has pulled their members. It was I think from July 28th to August 28th as to who they support in the upcoming election. And Jill Stein is leading far and away in that.
Yeah.
45%, Harris 27%, undecided 17.9%, not voting 6%, and Trump 2%. I'm not surprised that Trump is at 2%. And I'm really honestly not surprised that Jill Stein is at 45.3% either, because she's the only one who is saying what they want to be hearing from anyone. And I'm not saying that Harris is going to start sounding like Jill Stein when it comes to Gaza. No. But I do feel like
it's like we said at the convention, or on the last episode, at the convention they made some unnecessary sort of like antagonistic choices.
Yes.
And those were unforced errors. They were not things that they had to do they could have had it both ways in at times that they chose not to.
Right.
Because it's a convention, so you get people are up there speaking nonsense that you don't agree with left, right, and center. Right. They invited every Republican in America to give a speech there. And so the idea that they couldn't, after, hearing a lot of very explicit, calls for Israel's security and Israel, our friend, we must protect them, whatever, to not give one person an opportunity to address the situation in Gaza directly was, I think, an unnecessary choice. I think actually, the tent, as we are currently experiencing it, has to be big enough for both of those worlds, even though it's crazy to think about, because the alternative is Donald fucking Trump.
I know. Well, and I just wish that and this is why I wish that she would just sort of listen to, obviously, would I want her to say that she wants an immediate ceasefire and she's not gonna, and she's in favor of an arms embargo because how can you do a ceasefire when you're sending them bombs? I wish she would say all of the things, but she's not going to. But I think there's some things just politically, I'm taking myself out of what I wish she would do because I think it's morally right. I think that she starts every answer about this with, well, first off, and Democrats do this all the time, but they say, first off, I want to say that Israel has the right to defend itself.
Right. And
that sends a lot of Arab Americans spiraling, not because they disagree with it, but it's actually they don't have the right to do what they're doing right now.
That's not defending themselves.
There's actually international law that has been agreed to by all nations of the world that says that you can't do some of the things that they're doing right now. Right. So there's just little things that I think that if she was paying better attention, she could do that would turn some of these numbers a little bit. But the other thing that I want to say before we leave this specific point is that, you can't, and people will get mad at Jill Stein because people are perpetually mad at Jill Stein. AFC went on a live this week and railed against Jill Stein, said 100 things that were factually inaccurate about both her and the Green Party. We don't have to get into all of that. No. But when you are a person who's lost 10, 20, 100 of their family members to this situation in Gaza right now, you, as a person sitting up on your high horse, do not get to be mad at that person for voting for Jill Stein. No. You just don't. And so if Jill Stein gets a bunch of votes in Michigan, don't get mad at Jill Stein. Don't get mad at voters from Jill Stein. Or don't get mad at voters. Right. You gotta find a mirror. Yeah.
Yeah, well, especially when a lot of these votes were salvageable.
Yes.
I don't think
by doing little things.
Little things. It doesn't take much to suggest that a genocide is bad.
Most of these Arab voters, my guess is, are not expecting a ton from her.
No. Also, most of them are not interested in a Trump presidency. So you have but this is, for them, what you're sort of asking is what we couldn't sort of get voters to get on board with Biden, which was just well, Trump is bad, so vote for us.
Right.
That can't be your argument to voters who are losing everything, losing their whole families. You have to find a way to be also, I am interested in making progress on this issue. That's what she's kind of, I think, was starting to indicate and was kind of backed away from. And I get it in that I know that there were big donors who workshopped that change within an inch of its life and made threats to the Democratic Party. And there's always the threat of AIPAC money coming to the wrong candidate. Like, I get that there are campaign finance issues when you start talking about this issue.
Yeah.
I think that you have to at least be firm that if nothing else, you have to have it both ways.
Yes.
You can't decide that there's a group of voters that no one should represent.
Right.
That's stupid.
Yeah, agreed. Completely agreed.
Especially because, like, it's just easier if no one is fighting.
I know.
It's cheaper for us.
I know.
It's cheaper for them.
Yes.
It's cheaper for everyone.
Yeah.
And I get that there's a weapons industry that's invested in this, but taking them out of the equation because fuck them.
Yeah.
Like, everyone else benefits from us not wasting huge amounts of money on dumb
not
conflicts.
Fuck them, because we have to have the most lethal fighting force.
I forgot about our lethal fighting force needs. I had forgotten how important it was that we have the most lethal fighting force in the world.
Oh, God.
Lethality is the...
lethality. That's right.
the most important thing.
Oh, God. Nevada.
Very close.
The trend, guys. It's tied. It's literally tied.
Yep. It's...
But again... a little more tied than it was a couple of weeks ago when Harris was ahead by like maybe closer to 1.5 to 2 points, which again is still essentially tied.
That's an interesting state anyway, because that's a state that I feel like Bernie Sanders could win handily. But
yes,
figuring out how to get a moderate Democrat on to the team there is much more complicated. Yeah. Even though I think of it as sort of a libertarian
kind
vibe,
of, but also like a huge union state.
A huge union state, but it's the kind of unions that don't want healthcare, so it's like hard to know what kind of unions we're dealing with. Like CWA is not one of my favorite unions if I had to rank unions, which no one's asking me to do, but I'm doing it for you right now. But I mean, like, I feel like it's like a weird state because it's all hospitality unions, and they have a different vibe than a lot of like public sector unions. And different priorities. And I feel like really what everyone in Nevada is trying to do is not pay taxes. Exactly, which is a very libertarian vibe.
Right. And they are getting their wish right now, which this should be all the information that you need to know that the state is close.
Yeah.
Because both Trump and Harris now have plans to do a no tax on tips.
Yeah. Which
is basically like you only draw up that plan to win Nevada.
That's right. There's nowhere else on earth that...
Right, that's not to say there's not tip workers elsewhere. But, like, I think I may have put it in here. Yes, I read, as I was researching this, 1 in 4 jobs in the state is in the hospitality industry, and most of those are tip eligible.
Yeah.
So that's a crazy amount of people who are, like, getting tips. So I'm not surprised they both have that plan. It's cockamamie. By the way, that plan, everybody outside of people in Nevada and those 2 candidates themselves... everybody left, right, and center is like, that can't work, and also it's a stupid idea.
Yeah.
But we're going to do it because Nevada.
Now that I'm on the MMT train, I'm sort of like, sure.
Yeah, we can do whatever.
Do anything.
Yeah, sure.
You don't want to tax tips? Why are we paying workers in tips when we could be paying them in income? Like, maybe this will get us away from a tip culture, which is really what I would like. Because here's the thing, you guys.
Yeah.
In a world where ultimately everything costs the same amount because things in non-tip nations are more expensive often, at least service stuff. Doing math sucks.
Yeah.
And nobody likes it.
No.
And to live in a society that is trying to actively defund your educational opportunities left, right, and center, where one party wants to abolish the Department of Education.
Yep.
And yet they are making us do arithmetic every single time we want to pay a bill.
No.
It's an outrage.
Pass.
Like, if Donald Trump comes out tomorrow and is like, let's end tip work entirely.
Sure.
I would be like, I'm in.
Yeah.
Is it a Trump plan? I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care I don't care how dumb the plan is. I don't care who came up with the plan. I'm not going to sign off on the rest of his agenda over that plan.
Sure.
But I'm going to be actively recruiting other people to sign on to his dumb plan.
Well, this goes to our let anyone have a good idea.
Let anyone have a good idea.
That we're always giving people.
That's right.
This is another interesting one that has Jackie Rosen, who is their sitting senator, running way ahead of Kamala Harris. And let me tell you something about Jackie Rosen. Actually, I don't have anything to say about Jackie Rosen because she's the most unnotable person that has ever existed in life.
She's a Democrat in the Senate.
Right. So it's an odd situation to find yourself in, having Jackie Rosen really outperforming you at the polls. I don't know that I understand.
Well, I'm hoping that some of these races, Jackie Rosen, as your fundraising emails may have tipped you off, has been running since the dawn of time. Ruben Gallego, same thing. I've been getting emails from that campaign since time began. And so I feel like maybe there's just an opportunity for like voters in those states who have been inundated with campaign materials for these other two to like make up some of that difference with the Harris campaign as that material, as they start getting the fundraising emails from them more frequently.
Yeah.
Because they're coming fast and furious now.
Right.
And I feel like there's maybe just an opportunity for those campaigns to sell us on Harris's messaging locally, because they actually do have an audience, because people have already heard of them.
Right.
So, like, I think there's an opportunity for them, for, like, some of the down ballot candidates to actually sell up ballot, which is unusual.
Yes.
But, you know, we're living in wild times right now. And I just don't think that time has yet, I don't think that we've yet gotten deep enough in that world to, like, necessarily know. Because listen, I may eat my words, because I'm about to say something that could be dumb.
Great.
But in some of these states where the Senate candidates are absolutely unremarkable people who are running a zillion points ahead of their Republican counterparts, I feel like I'm expecting a real shift at the top of the ticket later in like the October world, just in part because at some point people are going to have to like look at a ballot and be like, am I voting for Jackie Rosen and Donald Trump? No, I'm not.
No, I'm not.
But they're probably just like, I don't know who I'm voting for in the presidential race. I haven't thought about it because nobody wanted to vote for Joe Biden, and we all get that. And so I think it may be that like voters don't really have to face this choice until they're like staring at a ballot and they're like, am I casting a vote for Donald Trump and Ruben Gallego?
Right. I agree. There are always people who split their votes.
Always.
But to the point of like 9%
of the people are not those people.
That feels off.
Especially
when it's Donald Trump.
The people who split their votes have a personal reason for having a stake in those local campaigns.
Right.
People aren't splitting their votes because they have a personal stake in the presidential race.
I agree.
They're splitting their votes because they like Jackie Rosen because her office once did a thing and they feel great. And maybe she has great constituent services. I don't know what goes on. And we know that the California senators don't, so we've never even thought about what other senators are up to. But I mean, like, maybe there's a reason that locally she is like known in the way that, you know, I think in Jerry Nadler's district, this is why he was able to run away with that when he ran against Carolyn Maloney. He ran away with the race because they have great constituent services in that office. And so the local voters have personal reasons for voting for him, where they're like, his office helped me do a thing and now I vote for them.
And I could see that being the case in a state like Nevada, which only has like one population center.
Exactly.
So it would be easy to be doing, you know,
constituent
have
services
a few offices in Las Vegas and call it a day, essentially.
But like Gallego's not the senator right now, so like splitting that ballot is a wild move.
Yeah, it is. I agree.
So like I just don't see a world in which that difference can stand forever. But I could be wrong.
You've said this, and now I think I've said it potentially twice. But like, especially when it's Donald Trump.
When it's Donald Trump,
you know, it's like if it's Mitt Romney, then you're like, okay, well, I get that because what difference are Democrats and Mitt Romney?
No, nothing.
They're the same people.
No, it's any of the Republicans that spoke at the Democratic convention.
Right.
If it's any of the Republicans that just have a forgettable hair.
Right.
I mean, like, there's a billion of those. If it's Marco Rubio, you still are like, well, I don't know. People are saying, people are doing stuff. I don't know. Like, I don't know what people's lives are.
Yeah.
But, like, Donald Trump is not just, like, a Republican.
No.
And if you're going to the polls for a Democratic Senate candidate and you don't like Carrie Lake, what business do you have liking Donald Trump?
Right. Oh, man. Okay, North Carolina, do you think it's tied, maybe? It's tied.
It's tied.
It's tied.
Shocked.
The polling average is 46.1 to 45.8, so it's essentially tied. Yeah. This is another one of the states where there's been a little bit of movement, like, back in the Trump direction, but also a state that was, like, lost when it was Biden. So, you know, like, you sort of have to take some of these polls
been in the running
that have moved back to Trump in the last 2 weeks. Like, you still have to sort of, like, be happy that they're in play because they weren't a month ago.
No.
So
no, and North Carolina is in a different situation now than it was during the sort of like Trump years.
Yes.
It has a Democratic governor who's very popular.
Yes.
It has, like, remember when we all thought North Carolina might happen and then it didn't because they gerrymandered the state in such a way that it could never?
Yeah.
I feel like that is such a known story that, like, North Carolina could come back from that and just be like, screw you guys, we're going to be Democrats again. They have been kind of a lost cause for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I was never they weren't on the hook, in my opinion.
Well, and this is another state where there is no Senate race, but there is a governor's race.
Right.
And the Republican candidate for governor in North Carolina really makes Donald Trump look like one of history's great political thinkers.
Yeah.
So And the Democrat is, I think, polling like 5 or 6 points ahead there as well. So that's another one where I think it's going to be weird, where you're like voting against an insane governor and then thinking to yourself, well, gosh,
but we
should
have an insane president.
But we should have an insane president, right? Yeah.
Right.
It just doesn't track to me.
No, I think a lot of these voters haven't kind of adjusted to the new world.
Right.
You know?
But no poll has had either Harris or Trump winning by more than 2 points since the middle of August.
Yeah.
So, that'll be an interesting one, for sure.
I think that in general, if this many states are running on this close margins, the vibes always help Democrats get over the finish line more likely than the Republicans.
Yes.
Because remember, being a Democrat on election day is fun. And being a Republican on election day is depressing.
Right.
Because then you have to hang out with Republicans. And so, I think that oftentimes, vibes are what pull them. Because we're often in this situation at this stage in the race.
Yeah.
And, really what we're hoping is a bunch of people who don't normally get engaged in this at all and are not paying any attention right now will, come out of their homes on election day and remember to vote.
Yeah.
Or will fill out the ballot that was sent to them or whatever.
Yeah.
And, those voters, we never really know what they're going to do until the last minute. But it always helps when there's good vibes.
Yes.
And I think this campaign could continue to have good vibes.
I mean, they're trying to exist solely on them.
Well, that's all they have at the moment. They just got in there. They don't have a platform. They might as well have vibes,
No, I know. Moving on from... Oh, you know what? We skipped something. And I forgot about...
We skipped New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And the reason we skipped it is because no one's even bothering to poll because New Hampshire has lost to Donald Trump.
Yeah, which is interesting. That's why we sort of wanted to mention it, because it seems sort of notable. I mean, a long-held, a swing state, supposedly. And granted, it's only 4 electoral votes, but, there's a world where that also can decide an election.
Well,
but,
it also was in league with Iowa early on in our lives before this last cycle.
It moved in the better direction.
Where
New Hampshire.
Well, it moved in a better direction, but it was a significant state for the primaries, and so we thought a lot about it.
Yeah.
It turned out that we didn't need to be thinking as much about it as we were thinking about it, because in a world where it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah.
However, it is an interesting state because they're trying very hard to live free there. And the fact that Donald Trump is not the man that they think is going to help them live free says to me that some of these states that I think of as a little bit libertarian-y might discover that as well. I think that about Nevada, like I said. I think that about the Southwest in general. I think that the whole West Coast is Colorado-y type places. Yeah. Anywhere where there's flatlands and mountains, I feel like people are trying to live free pretty hard. Yeah. Oregon, and I know that those states are Democratic states, but I think those are states where whatever's going on in New Hampshire is probably also going on to a lesser degree because they're trying so hard to live free.
Yeah.
And if you're, I mean, they made
or
it
die.
Or die. A lot of people who are living free are dying as well.
Yeah.
That's a classic risk of living free. But they really tried to make freedom a central component of the DNC, I think, because they know that they have a shot with people who want to live free because the Republicans are not offering that.
Yeah, I agree.
Fascism is very unfree.
It's true. Yeah. Okay, so Pennsylvania. Moving on to Pennsylvania.
That's right.
The polling average there, Harris 46.3 and Trump 45.1. So a 1.2% advantage when you take all of the polls. Harris was up by over 2 points on average a couple weeks ago. There's been a few recent polls that just came out within the last week that have either Trump or Harris up by 1 or 2 polls. Yeah. So again, a lot of recent polls that are within the margin of error and just 1 or 2%. So essentially tied, but when you take all of the polls over the last month, a maybe slight Harris lead.
Yeah.
So let's do Wisconsin really quick because it's our last one, and then I want to come back and sort of talk about the math here, because somehow as a person who is bad both at math and memory things, memory related things, I have all the electoral college math rolling around in my head. I don't know why.
He's a expert mathematician of electoral math.
I don't know why.
He's a polling math
I'm what's his name?
Savant.
But I don't need the board. It's just up here.
It's just in his head.
It's in the head.
Yeah. Well, my least favorite person is Steve Kornacki.
Kornacki, that's who it is.
Yeah, he's better than Steve Kornacki. Almost everyone is. But no, this has been a long... Brent can do arithmetic when it comes to polling math, which I also can't do. I don't know how you do that, but what are you going to do?
Anyway, okay, so we'll do Wisconsin real quick here. An actual Harris lead of 47 to 44, so still close. And again, recent tightening. There were polls 2 or 3 weeks ago that had her up anywhere between 4 and 9%. And just as of this last week, there were 2 polls that had Trump up 1%. So, like, a real sort of, like, tightening and kind of flattening of that race. So, here's the thing. I sort of mentioned that I thought it was weird that she went to Georgia. Maybe she's seeing something that we're not. And certainly just making a play vaguely at any of these things is probably smart. And also just making sure that you go to places, as we learned from Hillary Clinton's campaign, is also smart. Because that's how you lose them if you decide to, like, literally not show up for, like, 9 months.
That's right.
In the place. So, but the only states really in this whole list of whether 7 or 8, I can't remember how many we did. That's the battleground states. I think it's 7. The only ones where she had any sort of reasonable, notable lead are Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan.
Right.
And that, friends, is 270 electoral college votes.
Right. That's the game.
That's it. So, like, these other places where she's down or it's tied or whatever, like, go. And I do think that they know this because I also saw some graph with, like, where they're spending, and they're spending more in Pennsylvania by, like, almost double than literally anywhere else.
Yeah.
Because of those 3 states, the Michigan, Wisconsin, and...
That's the closest.
It's the closest. Well, and it's also worth 19 electoral votes, which is more than any of the other battleground states.
Right.
So, and if you're a Democrat, if you lose all of that Sunbelt state, which is the closest ones, right? If you lose Nevada and Arizona, and you lose North Carolina, and you lose Georgia, you can still get to exactly 270 with Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Yeah. It's exactly 270. So, but if you lose Pennsylvania, you can't make up for it with one other state.
Right. You got to win a bunch.
You have to get 2.
Yeah.
You have to have Nevada and something. So North Carolina is worth 16 and Georgia is worth 16.
Yeah.
I think Arizona is either 10 or 11. So even Arizona and Nevada doesn't make up for Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that you win Pennsylvania. And it does seem like they know that. But, like, that is where, like, those 3 states are very close to each other.
Right.
Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And if those are not the 3 states that they spend the most time in the next 60 days or however many days it is, then they're doing it wrong.
Yeah. That's why I was so pissed that they went on the Michigan attack that way.
I know.
The Michigan failure that way.
I 100%.
I also feel like in general
that you could swap out, I think, with any of the others.
Okay, right, because that's
you
slightly
still don't
smaller.
want to
you don't
lose,
want
but
to.
It's 10 electoral votes, so you could swap it out with North Carolina or even Arizona.
Yeah.
But,
in general, though, I feel like
but all of those states are close. The Sunbelt states are close.
Well, exactly. And also, those states are states that are more likely to end up voting Democratic because there's vibes. And I think the sort of like upper Midwest is more likely to lead in that category.
Yes, they call it the blue wall because it's the blue wall.
It's the blue wall.
That's why they call it that.
Exactly. So, like, I feel like at the point that you are winning Arizona, you've won Michigan.
You've 100%.
It's not a world where you're like winning Arizona and Michigan.
You don't win a bunch of Sunbelt states and lose upper Midwest states.
No.
I agree with you.
That's silliness.
They're either going to win by the skin of their teeth at 270 or they're going to win by
blowout.
325.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, and I think, given that a lot of these states that you mentioned, that you did not mention in that list of upper Midwest 3, the blue wall states, have these Senate races where Democrats are running 1 billion points ahead, I think there's a real reason to believe that we have that opportunity.
I know. Well, even in Ohio, which we didn't even do any polling of, because, like, that's probably one that, like, in presidential elections, sadly, Democrats have written off.
Yeah.
But, like, I just don't want them or you, and we kind of said this last week when we were talking about where to give your money, which we mentioned that we might do, in this podcast, but, like, I saw a bunch of people being like, Kamala Harris shrinks Trump's lead in half in Florida. And it's like, just...
Don't send your money there.
Ignore that.
Don't get involved in Florida.
Kamala Harris is within 6 points in Texas. Congratulations.
Yeah, that's barely a thing. She's within 6 points everywhere.
It's
all these people are within 6 points everywhere.
Right. So, like, if you want to get excited about winning Texas in the year 2052,
go for it,
and that makes
prosper.
you sleep at night, then do what you have to do. But, like, it's really just, and also, like, if you're like, gosh, she's spending too much time in Pennsylvania. No, she's not.
Right. That's the amount of time
the state of being in Pennsylvania too much doesn't exist.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like there are some, if you start I mean, one thing I appreciated about the Sanders campaign is they went everywhere, because I do feel like vibes are important. Yes. I know that was a primary, so they had to go everywhere, but I'm just saying, like, I feel like there were some primary campaigns that came to places that don't usually get any political action. And I feel like it is always nice to do a rally if you're going to be there for a fundraiser.
100%.
Like, I don't know why more candidates don't do that, because I feel like they're always in California and New York for fundraisers. Do a fucking rally while you're there. Yeah. You'll get 1 trillion people to come out. It'll look very exciting, and you'll get a bunch of celebrities to tweet about it. Totally. Like, that's like math 101 to me, but whatever. I'm always curious about that, because I'm like, I know rallies cost money, but I think that in a California rally, you could probably make money. Yeah. And you would get the boost of all the media that you would get from it. I don't know why no one's doing that. However, if you're thinking to yourself that Kamala Harris should be spending a lot of time in some of these states that can only go blue if, Pennsylvania goes blue, don't worry yourself about it.
Yeah, I agree. The reason that you go to those places is just to piss off Trump, essentially.
Exactly.
Because 6 weeks ago, he probably thought he was winning Arizona.
That's right.
So, go there, have a gigantic rally.
The largest
Get
one.
under his skin, make him go there, right? Because he probably didn't think he had to a month ago.
That's right.
So, those are the reasons why you go to those
And he
places.
doesn't have the money to go anywhere.
No. So, and he also probably can't even land at the airports because he probably owes them money.
That's right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So
I would hold a rally in every city that he can't land a plane in tomorrow.
I agree. And even if you just spend a couple hours, go have a rally in Billings, Montana.
Right. Yeah.
Just see if you can't pull John Tester over the line.
Exactly.
So it's not as if I'm not saying to
but
to not do those things, but you have to. Your focus has to be in the right places.
Yeah.
And we have had our focus in the wrong places before.
We sure have.
So that's why I'm saying.
That's why we have this worry.
That's why we have this worry. Right. Exactly.
From proven worrying. It's proven worrying.
Yes. Exactly.
Let's talk about her CNN interview. She finally gave an interview, like an extended interview.
Let's do it.
The New York Times got very poetic in their write-up of it. First of all, it was held in an empty cafe that, for some reason, had tables full of coffee mugs behind them. Empty tables filled with coffee mugs.
I know.
Who art directed this shot?
I know. It literally was
the most insane-looking setup ever.
It was definitely giving, we have to put something on these tables back there. What can we put back there? Yeah. And they ended up landing
empty
on
mugs?
7 coffee mugs, which is
so weird.
So crazy.
It was like they were in a diner filled with ghosts.
I know. It's so weird. There wasn't a vase anywhere,
right?
That had flowers in it or something like that.
Flowers and a salt and pepper shaker on those tables. You had to put empty black coffee mugs.
Mugs.
So weird looking.
Kind of clumped together, in between, in the
no one
space
has ever used a coffee mug before at a table.
I know. It was definitely giving different uses for the coffee mug, but it was giving 30 Rock where Jack doesn't know how to walk on screen properly, and so he wants a coffee mug in each hand.
Right. Yes.
So then he walks around while they're shooting him with 2 coffee mugs. It was giving that art direction.
Plus ghosts.
Art direction. Plus ghosts. Yeah. It was very weird.
So weird. The New York Times write-up begins with this masterpiece sentence. She was methodical and risk-adverse in the 27-minute interview, performing like a top seed in the early rounds of the U.S. Open tennis tournament, trying to hold serve, survive, and advance to the next round. In this case, her September 10th debate with former President Donald Trump. They got deep into that tennis metaphor.
Wow. Well, it's going on right now.
Clearly, they've been watching. Clearly, that's all they've been watching. I just top seed in the U.S. Open. What, the idea that they went along with to hold serve, survive,
I know.
What sentence is that?
Wild.
What are we talking about? Anyway.
An interesting metaphor also when a tennis person knows that both Carlos Alcaraz and Novak Djokovic lost in the early rounds.
Well, I feel like the only thing I know about the U.S. Open is that fancy people are losing in early rounds.
That's right.
Anyway. Yeah. She said some things, some of them concisely and some of them not.
Yeah.
She was overall fine.
Yeah, see, I think that a lot of people were excited about her fineness. Yes. And obviously there's people on the left who were sort of parsing a lot of the things that she said, and I get that, and I'm one of them.
Exactly.
So here we are.
Right.
That's why we have a podcast.
The overall, listen, she's aiming squarely at the middle in this.
Right.
So we're not the intended audience.
Right.
And it shows.
Right, and she was aiming squarely at, broad sense-making.
Yes.
Right? You could tell
certainly was.
That there were some moments where if she was not running actively as the president of the United States right now, had she been asked those same questions, she could have pontificated until the end of days.
And listen,
talk about a person who likes to get lost in a metaphor.
I'm a fellow sufferer of the disease where you start trying to make a point and get lost in your own sentence and end up never coming out the other end.
Yeah.
I understand. It's a challenging quality to have when you're running for office. It's a fun quality to have at a party because you can get to keeps things interesting.
That's why everybody loves her.
Exactly. So that's why she's popular.
Yeah.
But she in a context like this, where she's not in front of a crowd, so she's not delivering a canned speech, and she is going to be having to make concise platform-related remarks, she sometimes gets a little lost.
She does.
And she
But she did okay, though.
But she did okay. There were only a couple of moments where she seemed to one was when she was talking about her thoughts on the Biden administration.
Sure.
She got lost in an extended metaphor that never finished there. She struggles with time as a concept and talking about it.
But she loves to talk about it, though.
Talks about it all the time.
She has a lot of thoughts about time.
Yes. And none of them are direct sentences that tell you anything.
I love that. She got asked about, what was the quote?
Climate crisis.
Oh, the climate crisis.
And the quote is, "The climate crisis is real. That is an urgent matter to which we should apply metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time."
I love that.
She really got into the weeds there.
Oh,
metrics that include holding ourselves to deadlines around time.
But this is where I feel like it shows good discipline on her part.
She didn't go on.
Because that was the end of that sentence.
That's right.
Because
old Kamala Harris
could
have gone on for 20 minutes like this.
And when I think about time, we have to think about time in the immediate time.
Right.
And what we're doing with
in
those
the future,
metrics. And
because
then we
time
also
is a construct.
and then we also have to think about time in the future as time, because all time is time. Right? Like that's what she would have said.
Absolutely.
So like, kudos to her for
someone was like, if you start on the road to a time metaphor, find an off ramp before you get deep into philosophical time. Only mention real time. Don't mention any philosophical time.
No.
So there were a few questions about her changing positions on issues that we don't approve of, such as suddenly becoming pro-fracking, which she handled gracefully for someone who is being called out for changing her mind about a thing that is also a bad idea, but is part of the deal because
she also wasn't really pressed on it either. Right. I think she's gonna.
It was a friendly interview.
Yeah, I think she's gonna have to find a better answer for what is going to be called flip-flopping. Yes. By someone. Donald Trump, probably.
Which is a hilarious thing for him to be talking about, but especially this week. But we'll get to that. Yeah. But yeah, this is going to be challenging in a debate context. Like, I don't know if the answer she gave in this interview will suffice in a debate context.
I agree. Yeah.
But she certainly got herself out of that jam, that conversational jam in this situation.
Yes. She did say that she's going to have a Republican in her cabinet.
Which sounds like a thing that fake that like who's the guy from The West Wing?
Bartlett.
President Bartlett would say.
Oh,
it sounds like an Aaron Sorkin character.
Aaron Sorkin got real stoked on that answer for sure.
Well, he's been trying to appoint a Republican to be the president.
Oh, that's right, didn't he? Wasn't he trying to get Mitt Romney to be something? Or
he wanted Biden to appoint a Republican running mate.
That's right.
Like, because that would really bring America together.
I know. And she, listen, she said something to the effect of, like, I think the American people would benefit from me having different voices in my cabinet or something like that. And I would have personally asked her a follow-up question. And that question would have been, benefit how?
I was going to say, the question is how.
And I still would like someone to ask her that because I'm curious.
Yeah. Well, this is a nonsense thing that doesn't mean anything. So she doesn't have an answer. And it's a thing that was common practice until the Trump administration. So past Democrats have done this. It's always the transportation secretary.
And she's got a million Republicans that spoke at the convention.
There's
she
enough.
Could be like, look, I appointed a Republican.
Exactly.
And it's like, well, they're essentially in your party.
Right.
So
they've joined the Democratic Party. But sure, if you need to say stuff that Aaron Sorkin sounds like he would love to get the American people to believe that you could be the next President Bartlett, then I guess do you. I don't really know. One thing that I think she did well is I have been waiting for someone, any Democrat in all of America, to be like to not use the term Bidenomics, but to make a real defense of Biden's economic agenda.
Sure.
Because listen, some of it's been dumb and overblown. I get it. I'm certainly not the biggest Biden fan, as you might have heard from the last 500 episodes of this podcast. But I feel like part of your responsibility in running for office is to be like, guys, we do a good job governing. And part of what had been going on with the Biden campaign is they were just like, Donald Trump is scary and remember the bulging veins. And they tried to coin the term Bidenomics and then couldn't explain what it was or why it was good.
Right.
And then had to drop the term Bidenomics because everyone feels shitty about the economy because inflation's so high.
Right.
And so I feel like it was good that she took a stab at being like, actually, our administration has been good on the economy, and here's why.
Yeah.
Do I wish someone would take a bigger stab at that and more consistently? Sure.
Right.
I wish a lot of things. But I mean, I do feel like one thing that I think would be smart for her campaign to be thinking about, because of this interesting position they found themselves in, is she can run on both the accomplishments of the Biden administration and criticisms of it at the same time.
Right.
And no one else can do that. And she should take full advantage of explaining why the Biden administration was a success. And then also be like, here's what else we could do.
Right.
And she's like the only person in the world who can get credit for the good things and be mad at the bad things.
Right. And I think she's trying and still figuring that out.
Yes, agreed.
Because she did sort of do that, because after she talked about, you know, what they did well, she then went on to actually mention a couple policy positions.
Yes.
Which she has rolled out before, but obviously, having not done a big interview like this, hasn't really like brought them to the masses.
And hasn't been able to really defend.
But that's where she talked about, you know, the child tax credit. That's when she talked about the giving $25,000 to first-time home buyers. So I think that she's just sort of like still getting there on figuring out like what that the equilibrium is there on critique and offering solutions and saying what they did, you know, what they did well.
Well, but I think it's like, it's nice to have a candidate who's willing to try to find the equilibrium, which Joe Biden wasn't willing to do.
No, well, he wasn't willing to admit that everything is a flaming pile of trash.
Exactly. And she can be like, yep, everything's a flaming pile of trash. Here's how we made it better because we got handed a flaming pile of trash. And also here's what else we need to do.
What I would do to fix it. Right, yeah.
So like, and actually that was one of the biggest benefits of switching out the candidate. Because that was the one thing that Joe Biden couldn't do.
Yeah, because if somebody comes up to her and be like, I don't like Bidenomics, she's like, all right, well, great. We're doing Harris-omics.
Exactly. We're doing something different. Kamala Lomics.
We'll workshop that, guys.
But yeah, that I think was an indication to me that she is thinking about that, which I was waiting for someone to think about.
Yeah, she should continue thinking on it.
She should keep thinking. Everyone should keep on plugging away at that.
But I do, just before we leave it though, I do think that, like, obviously there had been a lot of fire coming from the Trump campaign, Republicans in general, and even some members, I think, of her party also, who were like probably like nervous about how this was going to go. Like, I think that she sort of like answered like the large question of like, can she, you know, exist as a person being asked questions in front of a television camera? The answer is yes, she can.
I also feel like I am interested. This debate is going to be interesting in part because should she be properly prepped for it? She was like the star of the first one of the, you know, those crazy primary debates.
Yeah, she really could end him if she could has a good night.
Yes. Yeah. And the problem is she doesn't always have a good night, but, you know, she's also gotten thrown into this weird situation where at this point I would be like, anytime that she's almost a little prepared, I'm like, you've done it. Well, great work. Right. Because this is, think a person who needs as much preparation as she has needed in past campaigning cycles. Being thrown into this situation. Yeah. I mean, we're living on the edge, you guys.
But my hope is, and, you know, we've talked about this on previous podcasts, and I think that, like, part of what may be happening both for that interview and also just sort of, like, out in the world of some of the things that she's saying or isn't saying, I feel like she's probably continuing to get bad advice.
We knew she would.
Some of which she's probably unfortunately taking, and some of which she's probably not, to her credit. Yeah. But I do think that a debate sort of requires one to, you know, I mean, you are truly left to your own devices.
Yes, to think on their feet.
And so, on their own feet. So my hope is that, like, we know that she's smart. We know she's good in a debate. We know that she's good, you know, she was good in a courtroom, which has a lot of overlap with what a debate stage is going to be. So my hope is that, like, she may actually do better in a debate than she did in this interview. Maybe that's wishful thinking on my part, but like I think there's a world where like she crushes it.
Yeah. I feel like the only concern that I have for her is that being in an era of her life where she's going to be getting a lot of conflicting advice.
Right.
That's what ended her in the first time that she was on the debate stage.
100% was. That's what doomed her entire candidacy.
Yes.
Was just
her
not
being
knowing which
not
bad
able
advice she was supposed to focus on.
Yeah, to contain two pieces of conflicting bad advice in her head.
Mm-hmm.
But she's, I feel like, got a little bit more kind of experience on this kind of stage now. So it should be fine. And she did Veep debates. And there's a bunch of clips, you know, they're making that go viral because she kept being like, I'm not done.
Oh, yeah, that's right. She can make him seem really sexist and misogynistic.
Yes,
not that anybody who's voting for him cares because we know this already.
And also, I think on a debate stage, she has maybe an opportunity, I don't know if she'll take it, to also project how much more joyful she is. Because I've been seeing a lot of clips going around of her, like, cracking jokes before press conferences and things like that, where she, where, like, Chuck Schumer's, like, having to shush her because they're about to deliver, like, and, like, those kinds of moments, as much as they are just funny sort of BTS scenes of Congress.
Like you.
But they make people like you because she is, like, a person who can tell a joke,
right?
Which almost nobody in Congress can.
Yeah.
You know? So, I feel like she has an opportunity to maybe just project a kind of personalityness.
Yeah.
That's not a thing. In that will be beneficial to the campaign just by virtue of her being on the stage.
Yeah.
Speaking of flip-flopping, though, let's talk about America's chief flip-flopper.
Oh my God.
Right now.
Because the amount of times that this man, Donald Trump, can flip-flop in the span of 12 hours should be studied by science. And especially over issues that they created out of thin air. Like, here's the thing. No one ever needed to be talking about IVF. At no point in our lives did we want... In fact, people are actively trying not to talk about IVF in most of their... Like, when you think about the fact that IVF babies are born all the time and no one ever tells you they're using IVF. I know.
IVF is the secret to all of America's families, and no one talks about it. And no one tells even their friends about it. And, like, that's how much no one is talking about IVF.
Yeah.
People who are doing it aren't talking about it. So they created this issue out of thin air where suddenly we worried, you know, because of their dumb obsession with abortion bans, another unpopular position, that they were going to, you know, now they're going after IVF, which has nothing to do with anything.
Right.
The fact that they made this into a conversation in the first place and are now having to back away from it because, of course, it's unpopular. Right. Because, like I said, everyone in America is doing IVF and no one's talking about it.
Right.
So they didn't even know their own voters are using IVF, which I'm sure they are, because every voter is using IVF, because everyone's using IVF.
Yeah.
Sorry about it. The only people who aren't using IVF are people who can't afford it, which is an increasing number of people in this day and age. But, like, the fact that they even invited this conversation is so dumb.
Know.
And now, Donald Trump came out in favor of every position on this issue in the last week.
On both IVF and
abortion. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember as we talk about what those positions are, obviously this is because he thinks that he's losing. I know we just talked about a bunch of polls that are close, but like, you know, 6 or 7 weeks ago, Donald Trump doesn't have to have a plan on IVF.
Exactly.
Because he's on his way to being the president and nobody's going to care what he thinks about IVF.
Right.
So the reason that he's talking about this at all is like, he's obviously probably seen some bad numbers on this. On this specific issue.
Their internal polling must be abysmal.
Well, especially on this. I mean, it would have to be. I mean,
because nobody wants this.
Nobody wants it. And good God, I mean, it's the entire reason that there wasn't a red wave in 2022 was because of this issue.
And his own supporters are holding cups of fake J.D. Vance semen over this issue. Like, they're doing weird stuff.
Weird things. Yeah. But anyway, he now, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, has a plan for the government to mandate insurance companies give you free IVF. IVF is going to be free for everyone.
Suddenly he wants
paid for by
IVF.
The government of the United States.
The American taxpayer.
Excuse me?
What on earth is he talking about?
I mean, great.
Sure, do it.
But also, was never going to be doing that.
Of course not.
But
this is the most insincere plan he could have come up with in every moment of his thinking time.
All Republicans, by the way, including his running mate J.D. Vance, just fairly recently voted against this. I think all but one Republican voted against this in the Senate recently.
No, because
it came up because there was a Supreme Court decision that I think scared Democrats into thinking that maybe they were coming for IVF next.
Yeah. Well, and also there's all these weird states that are choosing to are choosing to interpret Dobbs to mean that IVF isn't legal.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of weird arguments going on that needlessly involve IVF. Because as I have said, this should not have been an issue that they touched with a 1,000,000-foot pole.
I know.
Like, there's no reason to even talk about IVF.
Yeah. But anyway, so he came out with that, which Republicans, I think, probably were largely, like, going to just suck up and deal with, even though they were mad, because they were also mad at government mandates, because they've obviously been the party that has been against government mandates, even though they were previously before government mandates, because Obamacare is essentially Romney care, lest we forget. So it's funny that they're now back to a position that they held 20 years ago about healthcare. After they've been railing against it for the last
on a bit of a journey.
They're on a journey.
And this journey has taken them now into a sort of untenable place.
Yeah. So Republicans were mad at that, but when they got most mad was when he got asked a question about the Florida Amendment 4.
Right.
Because he's a voter there. So people are curious how he's voting and what he thinks about it. And what that is that currently Florida has a law on the books that Ron DeSantis and his crazy legislature passed, where you cannot have an abortion after 6 weeks.
Right. A time where you might even not know you're pregnant.
Correct. So there is Amendment 4 is on the ballot, which essentially puts it back to Roe times.
Right, 24
weeks.
Which was
24 weeks, which is when some science says that that's when a fetus is viable.
Right.
So he got asked about that and did not say the right thing per his pro-life backers.
No. Well, it's complicated because he himself has historically been pro-choice.
Well, he's pro-choice.
He has to be because
my guess is that in
raping
a room,
women.
Yes, my guess, and I'm not giving him any credit for this because I feel like it's just even more disingenuous. But like my guess is that he is probably pro-choice.
You can't be a consistent rapist and not be pro-choice. That's not. You can't have both of those things.
No.
Sorry about it.
Yeah.
If you're someone who wants to hold on to your fake fortune.
Yeah.
You know what can drain your fake fortune really fast is having to pay child support to 1 trillion illegitimate children.
Right.
There is none of America's lead rapists can afford to be pro-life.
Yeah.
You have to know what your limits are.
Yeah.
And he's really one of our most high-profile rapists at the moment.
Yeah.
So for him to, be stuck in this quandary, it's a cage of his own making. You don't have to rape anybody, so you can do nothing. But there is no world in which he cannot personally be pro-choice.
Right.
It's just not.
I know. But on Thursday, he got asked specifically about that, and he said there needs to be more time. And when pressed how specifically he was going to vote, he said, I'm going to be voting that we need more than 6 weeks. This was on Thursday.
Right.
Later, everybody immediately spiraled out of control.
Obviously.
I mean, the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America put out a scathing statement. Albert Mohler, who's like some crazy evangelical theologian that people care about what he says for some mysterious reason. Eric Erickson, who's, conservative podcast Dumbo. They were all like, we're not doing that.
I like that Albert Mohler said that this was, quote, almost calculated to alienate pro-life voters. Has anything he's ever done been calculated? Get out of here.
No, he was speaking off the cuff as he always does.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
He was telling you what's in his heart, which is always different than what was last in his heart.
Right, I know, exactly. So by later in the day, on Thursday, the campaign had released an official statement saying that he hadn't decided how he was going to vote.
Though he had officially decided, according to the statement, but of course he's never decided anything.
Right, but by Friday he differently decided.
Yeah. No, it's hard to know when you're flip-flopping on issues where to land.
Right, because now he's going to vote no on it.
Yeah, well, of course. He had to eventually vote no on it. Now, luckily for him, there's a secret ballot. Because I still maintain
he's gonna vote
that there is no world in which you can be like a professional rapist and be pro-life.
Yeah.
That's shooting yourself in the foot. Why do that?
Yeah.
Why even invite that challenge into your life?
Yeah.
If there's one thing he knows how to do, it's save himself.
That's absolutely right.
He doesn't have to tell you the truth.
No.
The truth is what's in his heart. And like when he's lying, it's obvious he's lying. And that's why I always say he's always telling the truth.
Yeah.
Because everyone knows when he's lying.
Right.
The fact that some people are refusing to admit that to themselves is not my responsibility or fault.
No.
But like we always know where Donald Trump stands on the issues. Yeah. And I know where a rapist stands on the issue of whether or not abortion should be legal.
I know.
He's also in favor of legalizing marijuana in Florida.
I know.
All of a sudden.
Wild.
Because there's another amendment in Florida that's to legalize marijuana. They do fun amendments in Florida. I feel like every time there's a Florida amendment, it's like something exciting and thrilling.
And they're always doing wild things, too. Because remember, they voted for Donald Trump and then also voted for a $15 minimum wage there. And
they, like, wanted to give felons the right to vote back. And
right. Well, they did. Yeah, they did. Yeah. And then Ron DeSantis.
And then they took it away, right. I never know how to refer to that anymore because the voters did it and then Ron DeSantis got involved. And now I'm, like, not really sure where we landed on it. But that Amendment 4 vote, back when Amendment 4 wasn't about abortion, because I think that's what the Amendment 4 this year is about, but was about...
It is, yeah.
But was about reinstating voting rights for returning citizens. Like, Floridian voters will do anything. They approved that by a margin of, like, 2-1 or something. It's like close. A huge margin. Anyway, so Trump is now in favor of legalizing marijuana because Florida should not ruin lives and waste taxpayer dollars arresting people for small amounts of drugs on them.
Sure.
And I hate to say this, but I think I'm in favor of his current position on this issue.
You should be, yes.
Which is this.
Oh, okay.
I'm in favor of legalized marijuana. I also am in favor of laws that limit its use in public because it smells fucking terrible and the smell is everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And he's in favor of both of those things.
Well, you just had a whole saga.
I've had a whole marijuana saga. I had a marijuana saga recently where I ended up quite ill from someone else insisting on smoking a lot of pot in not my house, but sort of in my house.
Basically your house.
In basically my house. And I suddenly got a little more conservative on this issue because I was suddenly like, we got to right. Because here's the thing. One thing that I knew would happen around marijuana legalization that I'm not really sure what to do about, because you don't have to smoke marijuana. You can consume it in a zillion different ways. And I'm in favor of consuming any drugs that you want, however you want, unless they're affecting me. Yeah. I don't want you to smoke anything. I don't want you to smoke cigarettes. I don't want you to smoke crack. And I don't want you to smoke marijuana. And I think all of those should be illegal because they bother me.
Well, but I mean, there's, historical precedent for having laws like that. I mean,
there's numerous laws on the book that are anti-smoking laws. I mean, West Hollywood has some of these laws in their tenants laws,
yes.
Where they say no smoking is allowed in any residential rental unit in the city of West Hollywood, indoors, outdoors, anywhere. No cigarette smoking is allowed, and it says it's because there is no safe level of secondhand smoke anywhere, and yet they allow you to smoke marijuana in your apartment, even if it's disturbing your neighbors, because there's nowhere legal else to smoke it.
Right.
And so there's this weird loophole where they admit that there is no safe amount of secondhand smoke. And then they're like, sadly, if your roommate's a pothead, we can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like suddenly becoming a Donald Trumper on.
Sure.
I'm like, make it illegal. Tell them to eat gummies. I don't fucking care what they do. But, do drugs if you want in your apartment. Don't smoke them.
Sure.
Don't smoke anything ever.
Don't smoke them.
Don't ever be smoking. Don't ever let me catch you smoking. Anyway, now I'm Donald Trump, so it's too bad.
It happens.
I feel sad about it because I don't like him.
It happens.
But anyway, everyone else is against legalizing marijuana in his world. The DeSantises of the world, like all the same conservative pundits and.
You know what? That's one where like if you're Ron, I mean, I guess maybe you say what you're going to what you support or don't support just so like your own supporters know what it is that you stand for or whatever, but this is not going to be one that Ron DeSantis wins.
No.
You know what I
people
mean?
Want marijuana. No, don't be arresting people for marijuana.
This is going to win in a fucking landslide.
People want to be using pot.
Correct.
Like, even I know that as a person who's against all forms of smoking.
That's right. People have been wanting to use it and have been using it
forever.
Since the really beginning of time.
Yes. And I get it. It's rough out here.
Yeah, so it would be great to be able to not be arrested for doing something.
Exactly. Yeah. 2 more stories before we close. Mm-hmm. One is you probably saw this clip of the Trump Arlington Cemetery situation. And here's the thing. I don't know if I care that much. It's just a silly story that makes them look dumb and it makes his campaign look mean. And these are both things we already knew about them.
It's just one of those stories to me where, like, I can sort of understand why the people who care about it, and I understand that it's like potentially like upending some sort of norm or something like that.
That's what he does.
And that's what he does. And like maybe it's bad, but it's just one of those stories where like everyone getting so up in arms about it only causes me to just sort of like react with eye rolls.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I'm like, it dominated too much of a news cycle
Yeah.
For days, really.
And probably during that news cycle, like 5 different women died of internal bleeding because they couldn't get an abortion. And no one got horrified about it.
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's just was sort of like, I can't, it's like we had to have fallout from it, and every single organization and group and candidate had to issue a statement about it. And I was just kind of like, I can't care. So you're not going to get any details about it from us on this podcast because we don't know them because we didn't look at them.
No, we have a more important story to discuss with you that is worth our news time. And that is the Lara Trump music video.
You have to watch.
You got to watch it. I fell down a rabbit hole right before we started recording of every song it rips off because the song is so immediately familiar that it's like if AI wrote a song, like there's not any quality to it that doesn't relate to every other song you've ever heard. You've heard every version of this song already.
It also sounds like AI is singing the song.
Correct. That's the other important point. It's auto-tuned within an inch of its life.
Yeah.
She's looking very emotional in a staircase in the video.
Sure.
And it's about America.
Yep.
It's about sacrificing for your country.
Sure.
It's really important that you see the video. That is worthy of your news time, whereas I think reading articles about the Arlington Cemetery situation is probably not.
No.
But here's a question. What is the agenda for becoming a music artist if you're Lara Trump?
I don't know. I mean, it doesn't exist, which is why it's weird.
I don't understand.
But like, does she think it exists? Like, has somebody lied to her several times?
Is she being like Rebecca Black? I
don't know. She's
what?
Old. I mean, Rebecca Black
was a child when this happened to her. Yeah, and but I don't necessarily trust that Lara Trump is savvier than Rebecca Black was at 13.
Well, clearly not, because Rebecca Black is now an actual musician.
Yeah, she really turned that around.
She did.
Lara Trump, I don't have as much hope for, given the amount of auto-tuning that needed to go on.
No, she's an idiot.
To get that song to happen. Yeah. Anyway, you got to watch the video, just so that you know. That's news.
There it is.
Don't worry about the rest of it. We will be back next week because now we're deep in polling life.
Oh, yeah.
This is our favorite time of year.
Yeah.
It's a terrifying time of year because we don't know who the president's going to be, but it's a great time of year in terms of there always being new polls.
That's right. But I do think that like some of this tightening is good in the sense that like it's good to know now, but because I feel like, we talked somewhat on the podcast, I think a little bit last week, just in terms of like how I think once we finally swapped candidates and then everybody was having joy and partying together, it seemed like there was already this vibe of like, oh, we get to be the president now for all of eternity. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, no, because you have to win an election and it's going to be close. So the fact that the numbers back up the fact that it's close, I think will bring everyone back into focus. That it's like, oh, we still have to vote for her to become the president.
Correct. Which is such an important thing to remember.
You have to remember to do that.
Leading up to an election.
That's right.
Really the most important thing.
Most, yeah.
But we'll talk to you next week.
Bye.
Bye.